Donald Trump threatened the Ayatollah regime in Iran with total destruction if they do not listen to the protesters. Protests in Iran have spread across the entire country in just a few days and have turned into a real confrontation with the power of the Ayatollah regime. Protesters are fighting with the police are already openly firing at protesters, and the protesters are capturing and setting fire to police posts and even military units. Moreover, there have already been reports of the first protesters killed. If you look at the map, you'll see that the protests have already swept across the entire country. The President of the United States of America has threatened to launch new missile strikes against Iranian military targets if Ali Khamenei's regime does not stop the blatant killing of protesters. At the same time, the Iranian authorities, Vidok, announced that they plan to sell part of their missile arsenal and drone arsenal to other countries for cryptocurrency, which indicates a very dire state of the economy. But the main question here is whether there is a real threat to the overthrow of the Ayatollah regime in Iran, or if the authorities will be able to suppress this protest as well. Let's discuss this together in this episode. I'm Pechiy, let's discuss this together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and leave any comment under this episode. This really helps promote this video, and subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechiy News. The link is in the description of this video. So, let's talk about everything, step by step. The protests in Iran began on December 28. The reason is the economic crisis, the collapse of the national currency, and huge inflation. One United States dollar is worth almost 1.5 million Iranian rials. The first to protest were the vendors, but the slogans, which were purely economic at first, quickly became political. The protesters want Ayatollah Ali Khamenei overthrown and a total overhaul of the Islamic Republic's policies. Due to unrest and clashes with security forces, at least 8 people have been killed, according to official reports. United States President Donald Trump has already announced his readiness to assist the protesters. But we will come back to this later. First, let's figure out why Iranians have taken to the streets in protest again. Let me start from a bit further back so that the whole picture is clear. In September 2025, the United Nations reinstated sanctions against Iran, which were imposed in 2006 because of its nuclear program and lifted in 2015 as part of the Iran nuclear deal. If you've been subscribed to my YouTube channel for a long time, you remember that the snapback right belonged to France, Germany, and Britain. Since the Ayatollah regime did not finalize the nuclear deal by the end of the summer, this European trio achieved the full restoration of sanctions against Iran at the United Nations Security Council level. Sanctions returning sharply dropped the Iranian national currency's exchange rate. If in the summer of 2025 $1 was worth about 1 million rials, by December it was already almost 1.5 million. 3 years ago, the exchange rate was about 430,000 rials per dollar. But if we talk about the pre-sanctions period, in 2005 $1 cost only 32,000 rials. Now let me emphasize again, it's 1.5 million. Among those who suffered the most from the sanctions and the collapse of the rial were mobile phone dealers. They had to sharply raise prices and lost most of their customers. And so, on December 28, it was they who went on strike, and other groups quickly joined the sellers. Inflation in Iran has remained at 30–40% annually for 5 years. In 2025, food prices jumped over 70% and medicine by 50%. In the fall, the worst drought in half a century was added to this. Its main cause was a natural disaster, the lack of rain. Years of reckless government policies made the situation much worse. This is the irrational, often uncontrolled use of the limited water resources of the Iranian plateau. And very often, all of this was used for what? For the nuclear program. Well, besides that, the Ayatollah regime spent money not on communications, not on technology, but on weapons. It would seem that things are already going badly, but against this backdrop, Iran also goes through a 12-day war in June 2025. In the first couple of days, Israel effectively destroyed Iran's air defense, killed almost all of the military leadership, as well as leading scientists and engineers who were working on the nuclear program. Not only nuclear facilities were struck, but also oil enterprises. In the war's final stage, the United States joined Israel and dropped powerful bunker buster bombs on the Fordo nuclear facility. After the June war, Iranian authorities introduced some relaxations, notably largely stopping punishment for women appearing in public without hijabs. On the other hand, repression against political dissidents intensified. And just think about that. In 2025, almost 2,000 people were executed in Iran, while in previous years the number of executions was at most in the hundreds. Here, it's almost 2,000. In short, societal tension kept rising. The strike by mobile phone sellers at the Al Aden shopping center in downtown Tehran on December 28 quickly turned into a street demonstration. The very next day, the protests spread to the Grand Bazaar. This traditional center is a hub of both economic and political life in Tehran. Well, they also began to spread to other major cities. And this is what the map of protests across Iran looks like today. Almost immediately, political slogans were heard at the protests, and they are quite interesting. For example, the slogan, "Death to the dictator, woman, life, freedom," and the most striking one, "Not Gaza, not Lebanon, my life for Iran." And in some places, slogans glorifying the Pahlavi Shah dynasty, which was overthrown as a result of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, were added to this, as well as personally Shahzadeh Reza Pahlavi, the formal heir of the last Shah, who now claims the role of leader of the Iranian opposition. In exile. By the way, he currently lives in the United States of America. So, some of the protesters directly stated, "Give us back the Shah. We don't want your Islamic Republic." The authorities tried to appease the protesters. On December 29, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian called on the government to listen to the legitimate demands of the protesters. On the 30th, the government offered to meet with representatives of the protesters to establish a dialogue, and on the 31st, the head of the central bank, Mohammad Reza Farzin, who was formerly responsible for the disastrous inflation, resigned. But none of this worked. Why not? Because the government led by Pezeshkian was ready to discuss economic issues, but not political demands, while all the protests had already shifted into the political sphere. As a result, the authorities resorted to force. On the 29th, tear gas was used against demonstrators in Tehran, and on December 31st, live ammunition was already being fired in some cities. Moreover, videos appeared online showing that protesters were already being fired upon in bursts. There was a telling incident in the Kurdish city of Kudasht where a young protester was killed. It turned out that the young man was allegedly a member of the youth militia of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and this did not look good for the ruling regime at all. How could someone from the IRGC be at the protest? No way. That's why the authorities quickly claimed that he wasn't killed by the police, but by the protesters themselves. That was the official reason for suppressing the protests, allegedly because protesters killed an IRGC youth member. That's why they need to crack down on protesters, even though he was actually killed by police. By early January 3rd, nearly all major Iranian cities were already experiencing protests and unrest. There were cases where protesters stormed administrative buildings and police stations. They regularly get into fights with the police and manage to take back their detained comrades. At least 8 protesters have been killed, including a 15-year-old teenager. So, when it was evening on January 1st in America, it was already morning of January 2nd in Iran. United States President Donald Trump wrote the following on his social network Trusushu: "If Iran shoots and brutally kills peaceful protesters, as they usually do, the United States of America will come to their aid. We are fully armed and ready for battle." Let me remind you that just a few days ago, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited Trump. And, according to unofficial sources, among other things, he was negotiating with the American president about new measures against Iran, which is trying to restore its nuclear and missile program that was destroyed in the June war. And so Trump threatened to knock them to hell. That was his quote. But I want to highlight one important point in this situation. Suddenly, a report from the Financial Times appears saying that Iran's defense agency suddenly offered to sell some Iranian ballistic missiles, drones, and other weapons systems to some other countries in exchange for cryptocurrency. That is, the export center of Iran's Ministry of Defense positions itself as the export division of the Ministry of Defense. So now they've already gone public. They've put up about 3,000 products for advertisement in different categories, including weapons, missiles, aviation, naval platforms, radar, and optical systems. And here are the payment terms. The payment terms are very interesting. They say they'll only sell it for cryptocurrency, so it can be hidden, bypass sanctions, and so on. This is probably the first time that Iran openly says, listen, we'll probably have to sell some of our weapons so that the Ayatollah regime can somehow survive. But I want to point out one important thing, so there are no illusions up there. Mass protests in Iran do not yet threaten the stability of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's power for several reasons. First, the protests are still weak. They are even less widespread than in 2022. And in 2022, there were loud protests, but the Ayatollah regime suppressed them. Also, the regime still hasn't used all its methods to stop the protests. At the moment, only a few thousand people are protesting, and as you understand, this doesn't even come close to reflecting the full strength of the Ayatollah regime. The situation may change, it seems to me, only when there are signs of desertion within the ranks of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that is, when insiders from within the regime start to side with the people. That's when we can start talking about things getting really serious. Ali Khamenei's power would be shaken because today the main tools for suppressing protesters remain the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Basij. This is that youth group, the wing and the internal security forces. All these structures are under the direct and immediate control of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But the regular army in Iran is purely formal, and even if it sides with the people, it won't be able to stand up to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Let me explain. After the Islamic Revolution of 1979, armed militias were created to support the stability of the regime, and they became the foundation of the Revolutionary Guard Corps. So all these militias evolved into a military structure that now provides security for the regime from within. Plus, they also built this network of proxy forces throughout the region. All of this emerged after the Islamic Revolution. But the regular Iranian army, which was loyal to the former Shah, remained in place. Well, it's just kind of like a tribute to history, but Ayatollah's regime sent it to guard the borders, which means not far away, because while the regime was sparring, it couldn't survive. So far, it doesn't look like these protests, no matter how intense they seem, can lead to the overthrow of the Ayatollah's regime. Well, but we'll see. Everything can change literally at any moment, so we need to keep a close eye on the situation. I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like it, friends, if you found this episode interesting and useful. You can support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation or a sponsorship subscription through the links and details provided. In the description of this video it says, support the Alexei Pechiy channel. Choose any format that is convenient for you. Thank you for any support. That's all for now. Take care and goodbye.